Hi, I'm Ajit Lenin. Welcome to the Enterprise Architecture video series, part 50. We've been going through the Enterprise Architecture 6-layer framework for establishing Enterprise Architecture frameworks. And the last few weeks, we've been on the architecture domains layer. And last couple of weeks, we've been talking about the information architecture domain. So in the last week, we looked at the business object and the policy objects in the information architecture. Again, I want to stress that when I say information architecture, I'm looking at it in a slightly different perspective than what TOGAF says, right? So we looked at business object and policy objects last week. We'll look at IT capabilities and services this week, right? So let's start with IT capabilities, right? What do I mean by IT capability, right? So we had a brief on this in a few weeks back. So when we define in the business architecture, when we define the business functions, we looked at how we can abstract them into business capabilities for reusability purpose, right? So the business capabilities can further in the information architecture can be further abstracted into IT capabilities. So that two levels of abstraction enables the reusability and identify horizontal capabilities that we need to implement in our architecture, right? And it also helps identifying any frameworks or tools that are needed for the implementation. IT capability can realize multiple business capabilities, right? That as we saw, the business capabilities intent can realize multiple business functions, right? And IT capabilities helps in basically determining the application landscape and helps in building the composable modules, right? So that ultimately what we want to build is a composable application architecture where we have different modules which takes care of different capabilities we can put together to deliver the business requirements that we are looking for, right? So the important aspect is what the information architecture layer as such or a domain as such, what I'm looking at, or in this case of IT capability, it provides a traceability from the business architecture to the application architecture. So that's the typical thing we always see missing in an enterprise architecture practice. We have the business architecture, we have the application architecture, and there may not be any traceability between them to map it from a business function to a particular application. We may not have any direct way of mapping that, right? Because IT implementation could be at a different abstract level compared to the business architecture, right? If we follow one-to-one relationship between business architecture and application architecture, then we are not taking advantage of the reusability aspects, right? So we need this information architecture layer. So that's why I have this layer built in between. So on an IT capability perspective, this is a tool for mapping from traceability from a business capability to the applications, the implementation aspects, right? So a business capability could map to multiple IT capabilities, and then each IT capability could be implemented realized in an application or a combination of applications. Some of those business capabilities directly map. There may not be an opportunity to abstract, so it directly maps to an IT capability. Right? Let's look at an example, a few examples to see what do I mean by this, right? So let's look at that. I picked some 4 examples here. So suppose on our business architecture, we have capabilities such as creating a request, reviewing a request, and approving a request, right? It could be anything, right? It could be a request, could be a ticket or anything in any domain, right? So if we have a typical thing like creating a request, review, approve, then we automatically should be able to map it to an IT capability of workflow management, right? So that gives us a indication that we need a workflow management tool in our application architecture, right? And similarly, if I have business capabilities such as managing a product or managing services, managing resources, etc., which is pretty much the reference data. So there is a capabilities of managing reference data. Then we know we should have an IT capability of a catalog management, right? Which can be mapped into an application that purely focusing on catalog management, right? Similarly, I could have business capabilities of managing the contacts of a vendor, customer, or at a location level contacts. So I think there's a typo here. This should say contact management, right? So we should, all this can be abstracted into a contact management IT capability. Similarly, we should be able to, there could be business capability says that we should be able to store customer level details, account level details, or a service inventory. We need to capture the service inventory. So all this should map into an IT capability called profile, right? So these are the typical examples of how we can abstract the IT capabilities from a bunch of business capabilities, right? And how that helps in the implementation on the application side, right? Let's look at some of the key characteristics of an IT capability, right? IT capabilities, as I said, can be realized through business, can be extracted, extended, or specialized. This is typical of any objects we are dealing with, right? So we can abstract one IT capability or extend it or specialize it, right? So if I say workflow management as an IT capability, I should be able to extend it or specialize it, saying that workflow for an order management or a workflow for ticket management, etc. Right? So that's something we can look at, right? IT capabilities can be realized through business objects or policy objects. We can use we looked at business objects and policy objects in the last week. So we can realize IT capabilities through that, right? IT capability can be realized by a single application, or it could be realized across multiple applications, right? It all depends on how we want to build our application landscape. IT capabilities can be further broken down into sub capabilities. For example, say if I say case management as a capability, then it should further break down into I need to have a ability of the CRUD or create and update CRUD capability for case management, and I should have a notification capability which makes the part of the case management, right? A status update should be notified to the customer. So that notification capability or an audit trail capability all becomes part of that. So the case management capability becomes an aggregation of all these capabilities, right? IT capabilities provides traceability. We talked about that from business capability to the application. IT capabilities can participate in a service, right? The service can be an experience service. We'll look at when we look at the services side, how experience services and APIs work out. But to deliver a service to the customer, IT capabilities can participate in that service, right? So let's quickly look at the meta model, right? A very high level, right? So IT capability, as we saw, it can be inherited. It can actually be broken down into smaller capabilities. It realizes a business capability, and it can be realized by using business objects, policy objects, multiple. I mean, same one capability could use multiple business objects or multiple policy objects to realize that. And IT capability participate in a service, and IT capability can be realized by multiple applications, right? Let's now look at on the services side, right? When I say IT services, right? So when we say IT services, it should not be confused with business service, which is a complete end-to-end service that we are providing to a customer, right? So when I say sales service, we are providing an ability for the customer to purchase and get that sales fulfilled, right? But when we talk about IT service, it is a smaller portion of it. Typically we are looking at a part of a business process or a part of a business process that specifically applies to a particular role, right? So a business process could be performed or participated. Multiple roles can participate in a business process, right? It could be an customer initiating a process done by an employee within the company, or it could be multiple employees taking part in doing different functions and to complete a business process. So when we talk about an IT service, I am defining IT service as a part of a process or a part of a process which is exposed to a particular role, right? So an IT service cannot be across the roles, right? So that's where I'm putting the boundary around it, right? So this is just to simplify it, right? So we can have a business process that can be broken down into multiple services, right? And services, I'm kind of classifying the services into two ways, right? Two ways of realizing the services, right? One is experience service. When I say experience service, this is a sub-process that is exposed as a physical or a digital interaction, right? For example, a customer walking into a store, getting authenticated by showing his or her identification, right? That is a experience service. Or it could be a sales process, shopping experience that a customer goes through on a website, right? That is a experience service. The experience service could be exposed to multiple interaction channels. So same experience service can be exposed in multiple different channels in multiple different ways, right? And it could be sometimes it could be a combination of so, right? For example, a bill paying service, right? Bill paying service could be exposed, can be done through the web interface or through mobile, or it could be done through an voice portal or through an IVR, or it could be done on a chatbot, right? So the bill pay is an experience service that is exposed to multiple channels. The experience experience service can be specialized for specific roles, right? So, for example, a shopping experience, right? A shopping experience, the customer themselves can come in and add products to the cart and check out, or they can take help of an internal employee or an agent who might be doing it on behalf of the customer, right? Both are the shopping experience, but specialized for the specific roles, right? So we could have an abstract shopping experience, which is basically specialized into an agent shopping experience versus customer shopping experience. Right? Similarly, let's look at the other type of the service. IT service. I'm kind of classifying as the service APIs, right? While we can provide experience services, the same nowadays, or it's mandatory nowadays to have APIs exposed for all the services, right? So the same process or a sub process, which is for a specific role, for a machine-to-machine interaction, we have to provide it as an API, right? The service APIs can be on a B2B scenario or a B2B, especially on the B2B or B2B2BX scenarios, APIs becomes more prominent, right? Experience services could be internally realized using a service APIs, right? So if I have a shopping experience, right, that could internally use a shopping API to realize that, right? So that way we can have the same service exposed both as an experience service as well as an API reusing the same code, right? And let's look at a few examples on the service APIs, right? So on the top, I just have the pictographic representation of what I talked about. So it is basically business process or part of business process qualified by a role, right, for a specific role. And it can be realized as an experience service or as a service API, right? Similarly, so let's take an example, right? So let's say a loan process, right? So loan process could be there. I'm just defining it as two surveys, just to simplify it. We have a requester survey experience as well as an approver experience as experience services, right? So it could be the requester experience is qualified by the role of requester, and the approver experience is qualified by the role of an approver. Similarly, a loan request loan API and a approve loan API kind of completes the loan process, right? So the same again, the requester API is for requester role and approve API is for the approver, right? Now let's look at the characteristics of experience services, right? We'll first look at experience services and we'll look at service API. So experience services realizes a same business process or part of business process exposed as an interaction, right? It can be exposed to multiple channels. We looked at that. Experience service can span across different status of the process. So since it represents a full process or a part of process, it can actually have a service can exist across different statuses of the process. An experience service cannot span across process, right? So I'm limiting the boundary towards experience service to be a process or a part of a process. An experience service can be realized or implemented across multiple applications. An experience service can have multiple endpoints. Typically, we say happy paths where a customer or an actor comes in and completes the experience in the most optimal way, or there could be rainy day paths where it might be in some exception endpoints, or a rainy day series where there is a alternate paths, right? So experience service can be generalized, extended, or specialized in basic inheritance characteristics. Now we look at service APIs, right? So service API, again, it's same definition. It is a part of a business process or a business process exposed as a machine-to-machine interface. Same service API can be reused across multiple roles. So that's the difference between experience service and the service APIs, whereas experience is specific to a role. API could be reused across. There could be subtle difference between the two in an implementation perspective, but pretty much the API could be reused, right? An experience service can be realized using a service API. We saw that. Service APIs can be reused across business processes. So that's another minor difference. So though we have a boundary of a service API within a business process, we can actually, if we can standardize the interfaces, we could actually end up reusing the APIs across business processes. We'll look at that when we come into the application architecture. Right? So, but on a execution perspective, it will be one single path of execution for a particular business process. Service APIs need not be atomic, meaning it is not. It can have intermediate states. So you can. As I said, there could be multiple paths, right? Just like experience service can have multiple endpoints. Service APIs also can have multiple endpoints. Service APIs can use business objects or policy objects. Service API can be further broken down into functional APIs or capability APIs, right? So we'll look at it when we get into application architecture. But in a service API, which is basically delivering its IT service to the actor, can be broken down into smaller functional API, which here each API is actually representing a business function, a smaller unit, right? Service APIs can be an orchestration or aggregation, right? So that's another pattern where we'll look at it when we get into the patterns of implementations. But it can be an orchestration where an API or a higher level API orchestrates calling different APIs underneath, smaller functional APIs in between, or it could be just an aggregate pattern where it can call, basically call multiple APIs, aggregate the data coming back, right? So it could be these two are two typical patterns we could see. We'll get more into that when we go into the application architecture. Right? With all this, just a very high level meta model on the services. So we have IT services, which can be extended as experience service and service APIs. Experience service and service API, they can go through inheritance, they can be specialized, extended, etc. IT services uses business objects and policy objects. The service API can be an aggregation of smaller level functional or capability APIs. The service APIs can be extended as an orchestration APIs or aggregation APIs. We'll get into more details when we get into application architecture. So to summarize, we looked at IT capabilities, looked at characteristics of IT capabilities and meta model for IT capability. We looked at experience service and service APIs, characteristics of them, and also finally the meta model for the IT service. Right. From next week, we'll start looking into the application architecture. Thank you.